Hello, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I just want to make sure that I'm not too loud, which is usually my problem, or you're hearing multiple voices. Victor, can you just say hi so that everybody knows that it's you? And
Hi,
perfect.
everyone. Can
Can
you
you
hear me?
put it in the chat if you're hearing two voices? And no echoes, everything is good. Can you just put a thumbs up in the chat, please? I would really appreciate that. And for those of you in my team who are also listening, if you can put it on Slack, that'll be great as well because we've had some audio issues in the past and we don't want to get started until the audio issues are resolved. Um, Appreciate if you can put it. My voice is a bit low. That's not really the case, but I'll try to speak up a little bit. I will adjust my and let me know, but no echo. Okay, perfect, Suraj. Thank you. Appreciate that. And Victor, can you also say hi once more, just to make sure? And can you
Hi.
all, guys hear
Yeah.
Victor's voice as well? And is my voice coming a little bit better, or does it need any adjustments? Take a just a moment to kind of go through that, and let's move on. Perfect now. Okay, all right, we're good to go. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, this workshop is a little bit different from what you guys are used to. The drill. We have everything on GitHub. Pretty much most of it is install less. But this workshop is a little bit different in the sense that we don't have Git pod. It's actually based on Xcode, and you'll see you have to install a little bit of stuff, and hopefully you got this all done before. But if you did not do this before, no worries. We will go through the entire workshop. We'll go through the demo. We'll probably show some enhancements to the workshop and all that, and you can follow it along, on your own time. But there is one service that is common, that is Astra, and we're going to use the document API today in our workshop. As usual, it's going to be hands-on, and hopefully you'll learn a lot of stuff. We'll have Menti. All of that is going to be the same, except we are not going to have Gitpod, and you'll have to use Xcode, which is really on a Mac. So you'll need a Mac and Xcode to be able to kind of follow along. Okay, next slide, please. Again, my name is Raghavan Srinivas. I go by Rags. I was a mechanical engineer. My undergrad was in mechanical engineering, but it's been so long ago. But my passion is distributed systems. I really love to teach and communicate. One of the things I'm really passionate about is what is referred to as the inner loop, which is really about developer productivity, where you do this, and you'll see this, Victor doing this multiple times in the workshop itself. So imagine, if you're doing this, during the day, during the month, and all that, you want to keep this as fast as possible, right? So this is really about developer productivity. I myself, I've worked in Java and Kubernetes has made it a lot easier to program in distributed systems per se, but it still requires a lot of work from an inner loop perspective, and I'm passionate about that. But that's not for today. There are a number of other workshops which go into other aspects of that, and I'll talk about that as well. But at this point, I really want to hand it over to Victor and let him introduce himself, and we'll come back in a second.
Right. So I'm going to introduce myself a bit. My name is Victor Misha. I'm a developer relations and software engineering intern here at DataStax. And I'm entering my third year major in software engineering at McGill University in Canada. So my coding background is mostly in Java, but for this workshop, I've worked a bit in Swift. And I'm going to be leading you through the majority of this workshop. So let's move on. I'm going to hand it over to Rags now.
Perfect. Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
There is a lot of resources. I call this the golden age of developers. We have so many resources. And a lot of them are free. If you go look at our academy, we have a number of courses there. If you go look at GitHub, if you go look at YouTube, just put a slash DataStax devs, and you'll find a lot of resources in there. And we'll see all that today. So the point is that all this is possible because it's not just me and Victor who's working, right? We have an entire team behind us. If you can advance to the next slide, Victor, that'll be great. Yeah. So the team
Yep.
is led by Cedric, but we have developer advocates distributed across the world, really. Multiple continents and so on. So we are here to help you. There are a number of resources online which are self-help, but we also do these workshops every week. Typically on Wednesday, and typically at 11 a.m. Eastern, which is where I live. But you can kind of find the time that works for you, right? And like I said, just feel free to use these resources. The idea behind most of these workshops is to level up your skills no matter where you are. In fact, I learn a lot, in each of these workshops. So even though, some of those I've written it myself, I learn from you guys. So it's really about kind of a two-way street where we learn from each other. All right, next slide. We will play with Menti, and I will bring up the code in a little bit. But for those of you who have been in earlier workshops, you know the drill. So what I'm going to do at this point is switch over to my monitor, okay, and we'll start playing Menti. Okay, so just give me a second to set this all up. All right, almost there. Okay, so let me go back and do the presentation. All right. So let me present. Okay. So you guys can see the code. Go to menti.com, and Victor, you can play too, although you're not eligible to win. Okay. 26247895. Okay. And please feel free to join. Give everybody a moment here to do that. All right. All right. Let me see how many people have joined. I have 2 people. I want a little bit more. I know there are about 17 people watching or more than that. So we should try to get to at least the code is 26247895. How many people should we wait for, Victor? We don't want only 2 people playing, right? Yeah, a little
No,
bit more.
probably a bit more.
Let's wait for a little bit. I think it's you and me, right? If
That might
anybody's
be
having
it,
problems,
yeah.
let us know. Put it in chat. But when you're doing the menti.com, look into your device because there is a lag if you kind of look at the slides. So I would rather you look at the device because when we get to the questions, it's important not only that you answer it accurately, but you also answer it fast. Okay. So let's give it a couple more minutes. Okay, we really have only 4 people, which is not looking good. Okay, so let's get to at least 6 or 7 maybe. Okay. I don't want to spend too much time either, so let me go to the next slide and hope that people join. Again, the code is 26247895, and if you put it in in the chat, you can get the link as well. All that you do is just say bang Menti, and hopefully that should come in. But I'll put it in there as well. It's 26247895. Okay. So we have 6 people. Let's get started. So we'd like to know where you're from. So if you can put in roughly where you're from, we'll get an idea of. We get people from pretty much every continent, from every part of the world. and it's always exciting to see those dots pop up, right? So that must be Victor, who is in the Bay Area, and we have somebody from, is that Germany or Italy? I'm bad at Europe geography. India, that's nice. Okay, and give it a couple of minutes. Let's see. Oh, we lost a couple of people. Oh, 4 people. Okay, okay. So let's wait for a couple more responses, or at least one more. Hey, we already have 4 continents. That's cool, right? All right. Okay. So we have 2 from India. And by the way, those who are from India, happy 75th Independence Day. That happened yesterday on August 15th. All right, let's move on. So how much experience do you have with Xcode? I've never heard about it. I know the concepts. I use it here and there, a couple of times. I've at least downloaded it. I am a ninja coder. Okay. I use it here and there. I know the concepts. Okay. Yeah. If you used an IDE, it's kind of similar. Xcode is really more Mac specific. Okay. I'm waiting for I am the ninja Xcoder, and that must be Patrick, or that must be Victor. That wasn't
Nope,
you.
that
Okay.
wasn't me.
So we got to watch out for one person, right? Okay. Whoever is the I am the ninja Xcoder, if you want to put it in chat, just let us know who you are. That'll be greatly appreciated. Okay, so this is kind of what we expected, right? We thought most people have never heard about it, or they may know the concepts and might have used it here and there. Okay, so Victor is going to be gentle. Okay, he's going to introduce you to Xcode, but again, it's not really, this workshop is not really about Xcode. So you can learn it later, but you'll get the concepts in this workshop for sure. And how much experience have you with Swift programming language? Pretty much the same thing. I've never heard about it. I know the concepts. I use it here and there. And Victor is going to talk a little bit more about Swift. Swift is very unique. It's an open source programming language, which is really, has a client component and a server component. Okay, which is kind of unique. And again, this whole workshop is going to be about Swift, and how do you connect to a backend like Astra or something like that. Okay. All right. Some people know the concepts, which is kind of neat. Never heard about it. About 17%. I'm an expert. Again, must be the same person who, or maybe it is Victor. I have no idea.
No,
Okay.
it's not me.
It's not you. Okay.
Must be the
Yeah.
same person.
Somebody is lurking out there and doesn't want to put his name out or his or her name. Okay, but that's fine. We will deal with this. Okay. And how much experience do you have with document APIs? I've never heard about it. I know the concepts. I use it here and there. Yes, I know the concepts. Yeah, great. Oh, I'm a document API guru. Wow.
Yeah, that
Okay.
one's me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Watch out for that. Again, not Victor, right?
No, that one's me. That one's me.
That was you. Okay. Okay. Then
Yeah.
we're okay. Then we're okay. All right. Okay. Cool. All right. Any comments, Victor, on what you're seeing here? Kind of more or less representative of what we thought it would be, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. I think that's good. Let's move on. Which APIs are you developing right now? This is useful for us, because we have our service Astra front-ended by what is called a Stargate, and Stargate unifies these different APIs. As a developer, I really want different options, right? I don't want to be stuck with just REST. SOAP. Oh, web services. I pity those who are using SOAP, but that's fine. So the point is, it provides REST, it provides GraphQL, it provides gRPC, even document API, as you will see today. Okay. So a lot of people, as we expect, or at least that's kind of how it breaks up. Is we are thinking most of them are going to be RESTful, and for somebody who picked the other. If you want to put it in chat, what is that? We just have an idea of what it is, just for our own benefit. Okay. All right. I think that's good, and I think that's for the questions. But please keep that window open because you have an ability to win swag later. And since we don't have a whole lot of people participating, I think your chances of winning the swag are pretty good. Um, and we have the ability to ship it anywhere in the world. Our process has changed a little bit. You'll have to fill in a Google form, and all of those details are we will provide that to you once we go to that part. But at this point, what I want to do is I want to hand this back, to Victor to walk us through the workshop, and I'll try to kind of monitor the chat and so on, and kind of keep an eye. But Victor, all yours.
All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to quickly go over the agenda for today. We're going to go into the objective of the workshop, okay, to see what we're going to be doing. Then we'll go into the prerequisites. We're going to download Xcode and create an Astra database and see how do we connect to that database. Then we're going to go into the core of the workshop, okay? This is where we're going to code a simple app and write some functions which will connect to the database. After that, we'll go into the demo of a completed app, okay, to show you that if you follow all these steps and you work on the front end on your own, you could have an app that looks like this. Then we'll go into some takeaways. And finally, like Rag said, we're going to go into some questions for swag. So if you have a high score, you're going to win some swag. So make sure you pay attention. So now let's go into the intro. Okay, what is the objective of the workshop? So the objective of the workshop is to build an iOS app, okay, in Swift that connects to the DataStax Astra database. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on creating a functional backend and starts with a simple front end, okay? So that's about it. We can see from this picture, right, we're going to connect an iOS app to the Astra database using Swift. So Rags, do you want to introduce NoSQL and Astra?
Absolutely, yeah. I was there actually in San Francisco on that day, and people might think, oh, there was a lot of thought put behind what NoSQL is, but turns out we just wanted a fancy hashtag to be able to tweet it out, and that kind of stuck. So NoSQL is really about, if you think about, like regular databases, SQL databases, and third normal form databases, and so on. They generally, the way you can scale is by scaling up, or scaling vertically, as they call it, right? NoSQL is really about scaling horizontally. Okay, it's really about commodity systems or commodity hardware and being able to distribute the data across. I oversimplify this, but this is probably true. Is that if you want to think about NoSQL databases, most of them are kind of a distributed hash table where you don't care where the data is being distributed as a developer. It automatically distributes it. It finds the data if you specify the key, and what it does is it's also resilient in the sense that if that particular node fails, it's not a problem because there are copies. So data is replicated. It can work with variety of data, as you will see today. You will see JSON in action today, but there are other forms of data as well. The idea behind this is that you really want linear scalability, right? If you go from 100 to 200, your performance should double. 200 to 1000, your performance should go 5 times. Things like that, right? Which often does not work well with distributed systems, right? It goes, linearly up to a point and then kind of keels off. It kind of goes off, it levels off or whatever. But enough said. Let's move on to the next slide. So Apache Cassandra actually has been around for, quite a few years. It's more than a decade, and I kind of jokingly refer to this that Cassandra was there even before the cloud, right? If you think about kind of AWS popularity and all that, again, the idea behind that is to be able to be scalable, have it highly available, and many of those properties, the cloud properties, are actually incorporated in Apache Cassandra. Okay, so it's really big data ready. The biggest point that I can again emphasize is the linear scalability part, which really matters to a lot of companies today. It's really about self-healing and automation, just like any other cloud is, right? Um, like I said, if that one particular node is down, it doesn't really matter, because the data is replicated and you're able to fetch it from the other nodes. Um, it's really vendor independent, platform agnostic. I have Cassandra running on all the clouds, right? And I, in fact, have a Cassandra which is distributed across the three major clouds. I do it using Kubernetes and what we call as K-Sandra, which is K-Sandra. But let's not talk about all that. Let's move on to the next slide. And this is an introduction about Cassandra and NoSQL. There are a number of other workshops where you can get more details about this. One of the key things about Cassandra and is that there is no single point of failure, right? It scales for writes and reads. Some of them do really well for reads, but does not scale for writes. And it's really not, you won't be able to kind of use that for all the use cases, right? Application can contact any node, and the platform takes care of kind of doing the work of a distributed hash table, except that you don't need to worry about how to build a consistent hashing algorithm, what happens when nodes join, what happens when nodes leave. All of that is taken care of by the platform. Okay, moving on. This is also referred to as ring architecture, by the way. So you might have heard of what is called as the Brewer's conjecture or the CAP theorem. If you think about the characteristics of a distributed system, there is consistency, there is availability, and partition tolerance, right? So those are the three things that anybody that writes a distributed system has to deal with. The point with the CAP theorem is that when it comes to a failure scenario, you have to pick two of them. In other words, you have to sacrifice one of them. Sacrificing partition tolerance is not a good idea in any case. So most of the NoSQL databases are partition tolerant, but sometimes they sacrifice consistency or availability. Okay, so if it's not available for a certain period, it's probably okay. If it's not consistent, it will eventually get consistent. So there are degrees of consistency. And what Cassandra is in general, is like a AP database, which is available and partition tolerant, but only eventually consistent. But the lines are blurring these days because even Cassandra, you can tune the consistency and make it more strongly consistent. Okay, next slide. So one of the biggest things that I keep stressing is the linear scalability part, and that's why we have some huge, like use cases, like in Apple, Netflix, and so on and so forth, that use Cassandra. And I've talked to some of these customers who have not rebooted their Cassandra instances for more than 8 years, which is like mind-blowing, really, from a developer perspective, from a software perspective. I hope they're upgrading their Cassandra version, right? Because they're reaping the benefits of the newer version. But they're in almost unanimously in agreement that it's from a reliability and high availability perspective, it can approach multiple nines. Okay. Now, with that, I think that's the last slide, or maybe I have a couple more. I will not talk too much about this. I already talked about the Stargate. It provides a unified API for GraphQL, for document, for REST, and so on. And Victor will walk through the document API today. But you might as well try REST, and maybe you are doing we'll do some SQL as well while we are there, because we'll look at the data and so on. But you can do any of these. Today's workshop is primarily on the document API. Okay. And one of the nice things about the document API is that you can basically put it as a collection and really store any collection that you want. And again, Victor is going to talk quite a bit about this. This slide really doesn't say much about what I've already talked about before. Basically, it's a unifying API, provides different APIs, And if you want to think about Astra, it's really Cassandra on the cloud plus a unifying API called Stargate, in front of it. And this is typically the approach that we take today, where we front end it with Stargate to be able to use the different APIs, and then the database or the data portion is in the Astra part. Okay, or is it the Cassandra
All
part?
right.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Should we move
Yes.
on?
Moving on to the next slide.
All right. So I'll take it over from
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. So the idea here is, Victor is going to talk about how to, use the document API and how to use any programming language, right? But today, he's going to use the Swift API. I mean, he's going to use the Swift programming language, but the concept is going to be
Yep.
applicable to other programming languages itself. With that said, Victor, I know they're waiting for you and the app, and let's get started.
All right, perfect. So a little bit about the app, okay? So the app we're trying to replicate today is called Grocery Handler. So we're going to see how to connect to a database using the sample app, okay? It's been coded in the Xcode IDE, okay? And it uses the document API to connect to the Astra database. It is an application for facilitating the accounting of splitting expenses with others. So for example, if roommates buy groceries together in one order, this app would be able to indicate how much each person owes the buyer. In this app, you can sign up, delete accounts, sign in, and change passwords. You can also manually enter an order, take a picture of the receipt and post the order, and see all past orders. So this is all done by interacting with the database, and we're going to see how to do that pretty soon. So that's a bit about the app. Now let's go into a little intro about the document API. So a bit about the document API. Data is stored in key spaces, okay? And in a key space, there is a collection or multiple collections. And these collection stores lists of JSON documents. This picture gives a graphical view of how the data is stored for the sample app. There's only one key space called GH orders user info. The GA stands for grocery handler, of course. And two collections are user info and orders. The user info collection is in blue and the orders collection is in red. We can see that the JSON documents in this picture are in orange. So that's how you can identify them. So in this picture, there's 4 accounts, right? User 1, user 2, user 3, and user 4 each have an account. And if you want to create your own database, right, I would recommend that you have a certain scheme for each collection. So for example, every document in the user info collection has the same 2 fields, username and password, and every document in the orders collection in red has the same 4 fields, username, receipt, time, and paid. So that's how the database is set up for this sample app. So what we're going to do next is we're going to create an Astra database and create the key space as well as both collections.
So Victor, before you do that, I had just one comment on the key space.
Go ahead.
Basically, we get a lot of questions about what is a key space and so on, right? But really, what a key space is a logical grouping of whatever it is, right? In this case, he shows a logical grouping of documents, but it could be a logical grouping of tables, and you'll see that the documents are you can access them as tables as well. Nothing fancy about the key space, but basically, like I said, we have a logical grouping, and if you kind of look at a database like workshops, you can kind of have multiple key spaces, and each of these key space might address a particular use case. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So in one Astra database, if you have multiple key spaces, that can hold data about different applications. So all you need is one database. So yeah, so that's it for the intro to the document API. Now let's go to the prerequisite section. This would be helpful if you guys have the GitHub repo open in another window. Rags, do they have the link for that repo?
Yes, and if they want a link, all that you do is you just type bang GitHub, okay, in the chat, and it'll give you the GitHub repo. Okay. All right, keep going.
Is that it?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so now that you have the repo open, we're going to go to the repo and download Xcode and create the Astra database, okay? So I'm going to go to the repo, and we're going to follow the prerequisites portion, okay, right here. So the first step is to download Xcode. So just click this link and hit download right here. So Xcode is pretty big. It's at least 12 gigabytes, so it's going to take a while to download. That's why we're starting with it. And if it takes time, no
So
worries.
Victor, give me a second. I will make our heads a
Sure.
little smaller because that might be easier this way. Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. Second screen. No. Okay. So now you're good. Keep going.
All right. So once you've downloaded Xcode or started to download Xcode, follow the steps, right? So let's click on this link to create an Astra database account. So it's going to send you here. So either you can sign in with Google, or you should probably sign up if you don't have an account. You'll enter your first name, your last name, your email, and your password. Once you do that, there will be an email that it will be sent to your email address. You'll click on that email and click on the verify account link. Once you verify your account, should I wait for people to do that, Rags, or just
No,
keep on
no,
going?
keep going. Well, typically what we do is we wait for when you create the database, right? It goes into pending mode. So
Yeah.
we wait at that point because that's a good point to sync. Yeah.
Right. So once you get that email and you verify your account, you'll be sent to this window where you can click on the create database button to create your first database. Then you will enter a key space name. Your database name, you'll have to provide the region, and then you'll click on create database. So I advise you to use this name for the key space name, okay, gh_orders_user info, because that's the one that we're going to be working with.
And
So
use the regions that are free. There are some regions where you have to pay.
Yeah.
So just pick a free region. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. Make sure you click on the free plan. Absolutely. So once you click on that, it's going to send you to this window. You can wait until this message becomes green to signify that the database is now active, right? Then you click on Go to Database, and that will send you to the main part. So I can just show you right here. Okay, so you're going to be sent to the dashboard, okay, where you can see everything. And now you have an Astra database created. So what we have to do is create a token. Okay, we need a token because you cannot interact with your database without a token, for security reasons, of course. So you're going to click on your name database. Hopefully you entered your actual name. Then you can click on the Connect tab. That's right here. Make sure to click on the Document API. Okay. And then right here, there's a link where you can click to create an application token. Okay. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to select the role administrator user. Right. These are the same instructions that are on the repo, by the way. So after selecting administrator user, I would hit generate token, and I would copy this token right here. Okay. So this token is the string that will allow us to connect to our database every time you want to perform an HTTP request. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to cover that soon. So make sure you keep this string, this token saved somewhere, like in a notes or a text edit file. Okay, so once you have that token, you have an Astra database, you have your token, and you have downloaded Xcode. So we can move on to the next slide. So now we're going to have to set up the database properly. Okay, so what we have to do is create two collections, user info and orders, right? Because hopefully you've created the key space with the correct name.
So let's hold on here for a little bit. So for those of you
Sure.
who have never created a database before, take the time to create the database. And for those of you who have already created a database, typically workshops or something like that, all that you need to do is add a key space in there. Okay. So if you can get a couple of thumbs up that you are able to create the database, even if it's in pending mode, I think that's fine, right? So so let's see a couple of thumbs up about being able to create the database or being able to create the key space or whatever, right? In the chat. If you're having trouble, please let us know ASAP, because if you don't create the database and the key space, there's really not a whole lot you can do after that, right? So might as well
Yeah,
wait for a little bit, okay, to see if we can get
absolutely.
at least one or a couple of thumbs up. Um, and also feel free to ask any questions on the in the chat. Um, we have some experts on Swift as well, so if you have any questions, they may be able to answer it as well. So feel free to do that. And like I said, if you already have created a database and you want to add a key space, you can just go to the database and add the key space. You can do that as well. Um,
Yeah, right.
let us see a couple of thumbs up, of being able to create the database. And the name of the database can be really anything. It can be your name, like what Victor was suggesting. But if you want to keep it workshops, or if you want to keep Swift or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Okay. I still don't see any thumbs up. I don't see any thumbs down either. Nobody's in trouble, I think. But it takes a few minutes anyway. So let's give it like a minute maybe. I know that you have a lot of things to cover, so I'm hesitant to wait too long here, right?
Yeah, no problem. All right. Still no thumbs up. I suggest we just keep going, okay, and then we'll see if anybody's having trouble. If you're having trouble, please put it in here right away, so that we can kind of help you, okay. And for those of you who Yeah.
have been at our earlier workshops, it's pretty much the same, right? You're creating a database and you're creating a key space.
All right, so now we can go and create the collections user info and orders so that our database is set up properly. So we can go to the section, now you should create your own collections. It's towards the bottom in the repo. It's right here, right? Now you should create your own collection using Swagger UI. So how do we go to Swagger UI? Go back to your dashboard, click the Connect tab, the document API, and then this is the link, right? Launching Swagger UI. So you would just click on this link. So this is Swagger UI. Now we're going to create two empty collections in this key space, or namespace, right? Those are synonyms. So we're going to click on this part, okay? And we're going to click try it out. So this is where we're going to create the collection orders and user info. So first make sure to input your token, right, that you should have saved right here. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, and the key space is, once again, if you've named it something different, then put whatever you named it in here. But if you named it the same thing, then just put that. And then what JSON do we put to create the collection orders, for example? Well, let's go back to the repo, and these are the JSONs that we're going to use, okay? So let's just start by creating the collection user info by copying this JSON and going back to Swagger UI and pasting it in there. Okay, so now that I have the token, the key space, and the JSON, I'm going to hit execute. And we can see that the response header is correct. The code is 201. So that means that the user info collection has been created. So now I'm going to create the orders collection by copying this JSON and going back to Swagger UI. So I've changed the JSON. Okay, the only difference is that now the name is orders instead of user info. So I'm going to click execute. And here we can see that the response code is 201, so the collection has been successfully created. So one way that we can check how if the collections were successfully created is we can use this right here, list the collections in a namespace, or we could go to the CQL console and just run two simple commands. We're going to say use grocery handler orders user info to use that key space. And then we're going to say to describe the tables. And here we can see that the collections orders and user info have been created. Okay. So Rag, should we wait for people to get their confirmation? What do you think?
Let's just keep going. Yeah, nobody's
All right.
had any issues. I think if you have issues, please put it in chat because I know we are already at like 40 minutes and we have a lot of stuff to cover.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll just keep on going. Okay, so by now you have the Astra database, you have the collections, you have the token. So what's next? We have to see how to actually connect to the database. So it turns out that we're going to connect to the database by performing HTTP requests. If you don't know what these are, that's great because we're about to go through them. I'm going to give you a good intro on what HTTP requests are. So we're going to start by going over what they are, and we're going to perform some HTTP requests from the command line in the terminal app using a tool called curl. So why are we using curl, right? We're trying to connect to the database in Swift. Well, it turns out that we connect to the database in Swift by performing HTTP requests. And performing HTTP requests in Swift is very similar to performing HTTP requests using curl, which is why we're going to go over that. So understanding how to use curl to perform HTTP requests will be very important to be able to understand how to connect to the database in Swift. So there's going to be a lot of similarities between using curl and connecting to the database in Swift. So let's go to the for beginners to databases part in the repo.
So if you don't want to use curl, which is like command line based, it's a little cumbersome. You can use Postman, or there are so many other utilities that you can use as well.
Yeah. Okay, so we're in the for beginners to databases section. So I'm going to quickly go over what HTTP requests are. So if you don't know what an HTTP or what it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So it's used to structure requests and responses over the internet. So we're going to connect to the database over the internet by performing these types of requests. So of course, we need a URL to perform an HTTP request. This is the URL we're going to be using. You'll notice that in the URL, there is the Astra database ID and the region. So this lets the URL know to connect to your database, the one you've created. There's also API/REST/v2 in the URL. This is to indicate that we're using the version 2 of the document API. And if we want to connect, for example, to the orders collection, here we would replace collection ID with orders. And if we wanted to connect to the user info collection, we would replace collection ID by user info. Okay, so that's the URL. However, an HTTP request is more than just a URL, okay? An HTTP request is three things. It's a URL, HTTP headers, and a request method. Request methods are, the ones we're going to be using at least, are get, post, delete, and patch. So get is to retrieve information, post is to persist information to the database, delete is to delete info, and patch is to update data to the database. So this is one of the most important parts of the workshop. We're going to go over this quite a lot. So try to remember an HTTP request is a URL, headers, and a request method. So now that we know what an HTTP request is, we're going to actually perform an HTTP request in the terminal app using curl, which stands for client URL.
And
But
one more thing,
before,
Victor, sorry to interrupt, is
yep,
again, if those of you are wondering, oh man, there's a complex endpoint, I have to remember the endpoint collection and all that. If you go to the Astra console, it'll give you a hint of what you're using, and obviously, if you're using it in a program, you'll have to know all this. But if you're just kind of browsing the data online, you can do it through the Astra console.
yeah, so we're going to start by exporting some variables because we don't want to keep on copy pasting the ID and the token and everything. So try to, or just copy this part, okay, by clicking this. Then we go into the terminal app. I have iTerm open, but you can use the terminal app. So I'm going to paste all of this here, and I'm going to replace these values. So you can get your database ID right here by clicking on your name database. So this is the ID. I find out that actually you should not include the -1, or else it's not going to work. But that is where you find your ID. This is where you find your region, and hopefully you have your key space right here, and you have your token saved somewhere safe. So now I'm going to go to the terminal, and I'm going to replace all of these values. Okay, so I'm going to replace the database ID.
You can do it line by line too, if it works better for you.
Yeah. So this is the region. I'm going to change the token. And the key space name. The key space name, right, is this. Okay. So now if I click enter, these variables will hold the correct information, right? So I'm going to do that. How do we make sure that the variables were properly exported so we don't have to keep on copy pasting them, right? So let's do it. Let's make sure that it worked by clicking this, by copying this command, the one that starts with printenv. So what this will do is it's going to print the environment variables that start or that have Astra database in them. So if I hit enter, we can see that indeed these variables are now stored properly. So let's go back to the repo and perform some HTTP requests. So the first example is this one. So let's just copy this. I'm going to go over everything in the terminal app. So this is the first pull command. Remember, an HTTP request entails three things. The HTTP method, in this case, is get. The URL, which is all of this. The headers. In this case, there's two headers. The first header, right, it starts by -h. The first header is accept, and it has value application JSON because the data that we are retrieving will be in JSON format. That's the format that we're going to be accepting the data. The second header is called Cassandra token. So this is, of course, the header that allows us to pass the token. For security reasons, we need to pass the token to be able to connect to the database. So quickly, if you don't know this, right, the $sign is just so that we can access the variables that we exported previously. So those are the three things. I'm going to quickly go over the URL. You'll notice that at the end of the URL, there's something called a query string, which is right here. The query string is at the end of the URL, and it's right after the question mark. So in the query string, we can pass multiple parameters. In this case, we're passing two parameters. The first one is where. This is to allow us to get docs from the collection orders where the username is equal to, for example, Andy1. Okay. So that this where parameter is pretty powerful. The second parameter is page size. We're setting page size equal to 20 because we want to retrieve a maximum of 20 orders. If we set page size is equal to 1, we would retrieve a maximum of 1. So if I hit enter, this should be an empty JSON, right? Because the database is empty. So we can see that this JSON is empty, okay? And since we're getting, the JSON returned will have one field, the data field. Okay, so that's how we get certain docs from a certain collection. So let's go to the next example. For example, how to get the user info. So once again, right, this HTTP request has the HTTP method get. It has this URL, and it has two headers, the accept header and the Cassandra token header. So that's basically the same request as the previous one, except that here we're going to be getting the documents from the collection user info, where the username is Andy1, and we're not getting from the collection orders, we're getting from the collection user info. And of course, the data that we want to get back will be in JSON format. So I'm going to hit enter, and we see that for now, there's no JSON associated with Andy1, right?
So this means that
So if you guys don't,
Andy one is not in user info, correct?
exactly,
Yep,
he has
yep,
no
yep.
account, right? Because in the user info collection, that's where we hold all the JSONs that signify that an account has been created. So now we're going to actually create an account. Okay, this is the third example. So I'm going to copy this. So here what we're going to do is we are going to perform an HTTP request where the HTTP method is post. So we're going to post or persist data to the database, okay, in the collection user info. So for posting to the user info collection, that means that we're creating an account. We still have to pass the same two headers, except because the data that we're going to retrieve will be in JSON format. The second header is Cassandra token, of course, right? Because for security reasons, we have to pass that token. You'll notice there is a third header because we're posting. We have to specify that the content type, okay, of the data we're posting is in JSON formats, okay? So this is to specify that the data we're posting is in JSON format. So now I'm going to change the test username and test password to, for example, Andy1, okay? And password test password. So if I hit enter, I get a JSON back, right? Because the accept has value application JSON, so we're getting a JSON back. I'm getting the document ID back. So I can copy paste this document ID and go to Swagger UI to make sure that the JSON has been successfully posted. So I'm going to go to Swagger UI and go to the get a document section. I'm going to hit tried out, and I'm
And all
going
of this is
to,
in the instructions. So if you're finding it
yeah.
a little bit hard to follow, no big deal. It's all in the GitHub instructions.
So I'm posting the document ID here, and I have to put the token right here. The namespace is grocery handler orders user info, and the collection is user info. So if I hit execute, we can see that this document has been indeed successfully posted, right? It's right here. Another way that we could make sure that this document has been successfully posted is by doing the same
Cool, come on.
get request, right? We're going to get from the collection user info the docs where the username is equal to Andy1. If I hit enter, this is the data that's been retrieved, right? It's the same document ID, and there's the password field and the username field with the appropriate values. Okay, so now we know how to perform HTTP requests, right? We know that they entail three things: the URL, the headers, and the request method. So remember, right, I started this off by saying that it's important that we know how to use curl because performing HTTP requests in Swift is very similar. So how do we perform HTTP requests in Swift to connect to the database in Swift? By using these structs and classes, the JSON encoder class, the URL request struct, and the URL session class. So what do they do? The JSON encoder class makes it easy to convert a struct into a JSON type, which can then be posted to the database. The URL request struct encompasses the information recorded regarding the HTTP request. So this means the URL, the HTTP method, as well as the HTTP headers. And then we're actually going to perform the request to the server using the URL session class. So that's a bit about how to perform HTTP requests in Swift. We're going to use these three classes and structs. So let's go back to the presentation and move on.
So the nice thing about the document is really, with the document API is really that you can put anything you want in there, right? As opposed to like a key value pair where, you have to have kind of similar objects, right? In a document, you can. The key thing is that
It's
you
schemaless.
need to have the document ID, right? And only after that you can do anything with that particular document.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to go into the core of the workshop. So we're actually going to do some live coding, and you can follow along if you've downloaded Xcode. And if you haven't, no problem. This is all recorded.
Can you put in chat if you already have Xcode downloaded and good to go? just so I'm getting an idea of this is, like I said, a little bit different. Usually we don't expect you to install anything, but in this case we are making an exception because typically this is not available with Gitpod, and this is not available with any IDE on the cloud or whatever. So you have to install it yourself.
Are there any responses,
Not
Rags?
yet. Keep going. Yeah. Xcode
Okay.
downloaded. I have Jigna. Thank you, Jigna. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So if you have Xcode downloaded, you can just follow
Yeah.
along. And by the end, you'll have a cool app. So let's get into the core of the workshop, where we're going to see what the actual code is to connect to Astra and Swift. So first, if you've never used Xcode before, we're going to do just a simple app, a simple project to be able to print hello world to the console by clicking a button in the app. Okay. So this is just to be able to call a backend function from the front end. So I'm going to go to Xcode. I'm going to select, well, once Xcode opens, I'm going to select create a new Xcode project. You can see all of this,
Yeah.
right, Rags?
Yeah. Very good. Keep
Okay.
going. Yeah.
So make sure you select iOS and app. Okay. Then you hit next. We're going to call the app, we're going to call it group accounting. You could call it grocery handler because that's the okay, quit unexpectedly. You could call it grocery handler because that is what the app that we're trying to replicate, but I'm just going to call it group accounting. Make sure you select Swift UI for your interface and the language Swift. And then hit next. And I'm going to save it to my desktop. You can see that a new folder has been created. Okay, so now Xcode is open and if a new app has been created. So if you're new to Xcode, I'm going to go over some of these things. We can see that in the group accounting folder right here, there are two new files that we're going to pay attention to. The first one is called group accounting app, and the second one is called content view. So I'm going to click on group accounting app. Okay, this is the main file. That's why there's an at main. This is the first struct that's going to be loaded. And the first view that the user will see when he or she opens the app will be content view. So that's the first thing that the user will see. So I'm going to go to content view. All it is a text hello world. So for now, our app is pretty basic. All it is a text hello world. And you can see on the right side, there's the preview. So this preview is available thanks to this struct, okay? We can tell that this preview is a preview provider, okay? And it calls content view. So without this struct, the app would still work. We would just not be able to see the preview alongside the code, right? Because when we modify the front end, we want to see in real time what the preview looks like. So that's why this struct is here. So the preview is taking a bit long to load, but once it loads, you'll be able to see it well. You'll notice that I just clicked iPhone 13 Pro, right? Because that's where I want to run it.
And one of the cool things about using Xcode is you can try it on different skins. Um, I mean, I have like a couple of iPhones, but there's so many of these devices, right? And each of them might be a little different and so on. But I think with the Xcode, which is kind of cool, you can preview it whenever it comes up and check to see if it's performing okay. Because I mean, Victor did a very simple UI, but it could be a little bit more sophisticated than that, right? So you want to be sure that it kind of works well on your iPad, on your Mac, on your watch, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And
Okay,
Xcode
so
provides the ability. Yeah.
here we can see the preview. So once again, the preview calls content view. So if I modify content view, for example, by removing the comma, we can see that the comma is removed here.
Great.
Okay, so now that's a bit about Xcode. Let's call a backend function from the front end. So we're gonna do something very simple. We're gonna go to group accounting app and create a function called print hello world. Okay. All this will do is it will print hello world to the console. I'm going to go to content view, and I'm going to create a button, which will be called print hello world. So any line of code that is within these brackets will be called if the button is clicked. So every time we click the button, I want this function to be called print hello world, okay? So for now, the app is just one view, and all there is to it is a button, which when clicked will print hello world. So I'm going to do Command R. I'm going to hit the arrow right here to run this on a simulator, right, on the iPhone 13 Pro simulator. You can see that a simulator app has been opened. So I'll just have to wait for this. And it's normal, by the way, if this takes time on your computer as well, because Xcode is a pretty big app.
I think it's also, it's downloading all the Swift dependencies, right? Like, for example, the import Swift UI, or whatever
Yeah.
imports you do, is also being um, downloaded, I guess, right?
And I mean, it's the first time that
Yeah.
it's loading. There's no cache or anything.
And by the way, put in chat if we are going too slow or too fast, and we can adjust this. One of the nice things I like about this workshop is that we are actually diving into code. In a lot of our workshops, we just simply don't have the time to do that, and we expect you to just follow the instructions, right? But here, Victor is kind of going into the code and kind of walking through the code to kind of give you an idea of how exactly it works.
All right, so it's finally loaded. So we can see that the app for now is just a simple button, right? Print hello world, right? The string is the string right here. And every time I click the button, hello world is printed to the console, right? So that is how we call a backend function from the front end. So you can imagine this button being, for example, create account, and it would call the function, the backend function, which would post a user info to the Astra database. Okay, so now all that's left to do is to actually go into the code, right? So I'm going to go back to the presentation, and we're going to move on to the first important part of the code. We're going to have to create the model and the variables. So we're only going to work with the user info struct. We could work with the orders struct as well, right? Because remember, there's two collections in our sample app. But just because we have, time constraints, we're just going to work with one, because once you know how to work with one struct, working with any other one is really the same code. And we're going to have the variables just as global variables. That's not really good practice, right? Usually you would use environment variables for safety reasons as well. But for our purposes, it's fine. So I'm going to go into Xcode. First, I'm going to copy paste this code, and I'm going to send it to you, Rags, in the chat. If you want to post it in the other chat.
Sure.
Did you get it?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay. So let me know when they have that string.
Yeah. I have a little bit of a problem because keep going. Yeah, because I have to do something
Okay.
else here. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to create a new file in the group accounting folder. It's going to be an iOS Swift file, which I will call model, okay? In here, right, I'm going to put the model. All the model is this struct, okay? And I'm going to take these environment variables, and I'm going to put them in the main file. Okay, so the model for now is just one struct, right? If you had a bigger model, this is where you would put all your structs. You'll notice that there's a codable here because we want this struct to be codable, which means we can use the JSON encoder to encode this struct into a JSON, so then we can post it to the database. So I have these variables right here. I'm gonna have to replace them with the actual values, right? So you could get the values by doing the same command that we did before, right? Print env grep Astra database, and here you have all your values. And then you have to replace them in here, right? So I'm going to do that. So this is the database ID. I'm going to import the token. Normally, by the way, you should not share your token, especially on a recorded session, but for this, it's fine. I'm going to put the region and the key space name. Okay. So now we have the variables right here so that we don't have to keep on copy pasting these values. We can just call them by calling these simple strings. We have the model right here. So now we're going to go back to the presentation and move on to the next slide. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a function called getURLRequest, which will return a URL request struct or an instance of a URL request struct. So every connection to the database is done by performing an HTTP request, and every HTTP request in Swift requires an instance of the URL request struct. So we're going to create a function that will return a URL request struct so that the code isn't duplicated every time we perform an HTTP request. So let's go to Xcode, and we're going to create a new file in the group accounting folder. We're going to call this, well, first, right, make sure this is an iOS Swift file, okay? We're going to call this file, for example, database helper. This is the file where we're going to put most of our functions in today. You'll notice that we don't have to import model or anything to access the struct in the model. So we're going to create a function, okay, called getURLRequest. Of course, in a URL request, right, if you don't remember, it entails the information about the HTTP requests. So the URL, the headers, and the HTTP request method. So I'm going to have to pass the HTTP method as a parameter, okay? It's a string. And the main part of the URL stays the same, right? Sometimes there's a query string, which differs as well. So we're going to pass the end of the URL as a parameter. Okay, we don't have to pass the whole URL. And we want to return a URL request struct. So how do we return something in Swift? By passing this arrow here and then URL request. Okay, so that's the method right here. We're going to add some code. So let's start by creating the URL, okay? So the URL is a string. So this is the string. Rags, I'm going to send you a string right here in the Skype chat.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, looks like it.
The problem with YouTube chat is it restricts to 200 characters. So this is fine, but we'll figure it out. I'm gonna post them line by line or something like that.
Okay. So this is the main part of the URL that doesn't change, right? You'll notice that this is the variable that we wrote here. And same for this one. So the main part of the URL is the same one that we've used for the curl commands, right? We're going to call the second version of the document API right here. And of course, we have to add the end of the URL at the end of the URL, right? That makes sense. So once that's done, we have to actually encode the string because it turns out that some characters cannot be passed in the URL, okay? So we're going to create an encoded string, which is the str.add%encoding, okay? And we're only going to allow the characters that can be passed in the URL, okay? I'm going to add a exclamation point here. So now that we have the encoded string, we can create the URL, okay? So the URL will be, right, it's going to take a string, and we're going to pass the encoded string, okay? So now that we have a URL, we can create the URL request struct, which will be the struct that we're going to return afterwards. So var URL request is equal to URL request. And you can see that it takes for a parameter a URL. So we're going to pass the URL that we just created here. So now that we have a URL request struct, for now it only has the URL. Remember, there's three things for an HTTP request: the URL, the HTTP methods, and the headers. So for now, this struct is missing two things: the headers and the HTTP method. Let's start by setting the HTTP method. We're going to say URL request dot HTTP method is equal to the HTTP method that was passed as a parameter. Okay. Now we have to set the headers to the proper values. So we're going to say URL request dot set value. So let's go back to curl. So this is one of the curl commands. There were two headers. Okay, the first header was accept with the value application JSON. So the value is application JSON, and the header is accept. So you can see there's a lot of similarities between using curl and Swift to connect to the database. So we're gonna set the value for the second header, right? The second header is X Cassandra token, okay, and it has value whatever the token is. So the value will be the Astra database token, and the header field is X Cassandra token. So now that we've set the URL, the HTTP method, and the headers, we can return the URL request struct. So we might think that we're done now. There's actually one last thing we have to add, okay? Remember when we were posting data, there was an additional header because we had to specify that the data we are posting has a certain content type. So the header is content type with value application JSON. So I'm going to go back to the code, and I'm going to say if the HTTP method is equal to post, I'm going to do URL request dot set value. The value is application slash JSON for the header field content type. Okay. I'm actually just going to copy paste this.
So Victor, I'm monitoring the chat and I don't see any questions, but I had a question. Why do you want to do it only for post? I mean, can't we do it for everything, or because anyway we are just playing with JSON, correct?
Yes, but right, this header is only
Only
needed
for
if we're posting data
thank you.
because we're passing another parameter, which is a string, and we have to let them know that the content type is in JSON format.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. So it'll
Yeah.
return JSON as a string, for all the other calls, right, or something like that. Okay, yeah.
Yes, that's why the accept header is there even if we're posting, because we're always going to get some data back. So I'm just going to add a comment here, right? The HTTP method will be post, patch, delete, or get, for example. Okay. So that's it for this function. Let me just quickly make sure that it's all correct. Okay, so that's it. I'm just gonna add a quick comment here. This function is called every time a HTTP request is performed to connect to Astra. So this function we're going to use a lot today. So let's go back to the presentation and move on. We're going to see how to post an order or user info. So the principles are the same, right? But we're just going to actually post a user info, which is creating an account. So what are the steps to do this? So the first step is to encode an instance of the user info struct into a data struct using the JSON encoder class, right? The second step is to create a URL request struct with the correct info. So of course, step 2 is already taken care of because we're going to call the function that we just wrote. The third step is to actually perform the request to the server using the URL session class. The URL session class will take 2 parameters, the URL request struct and the data to post. And then once we've performed the request, we're going to get a response back, and we're going to make sure that the response code indicates a successful post, okay? And if the post is not successful, we're going to print an error message. So these are the basic steps. So let's get into the code and see how to do it. So let's write the function post user info, okay, which will take a user info as a parameter. And it's going to post a user info. So remember, in this function, we're going to use the URL session class to perform the request to the server. This call is an asynchronous call, which means this function is an asynchronous function. But it's also, the URL session call is also a call that throws an error. And we don't want to just handle an error. For our purposes in this workshop, it's kind of beyond the scope. So we're just going to throw the error as well. Okay, so this is the main part of the function. Now we're going to get into the code. So remember, the first step is to take the struct and convert it into a data type using the JSON encoder class. So we're going to create an encoder, which is a JSON encoder. And then we're going to try to convert the struct into a data type. So remember, right, in the model, this codable part is here to ensure that we can use the JSON encoder to encode it. So we're going to now try to convert the user info struct. So we're going to say guard let the upload data is equal to try encoder.encode user info. Okay, so if the upload data is successfully encoded, that's great. Else, if there's an error somehow, we're going to print could not convert struct to data, okay, or to JSON, and we're going to return. So if the code gets to here, that means that the user info struct was successfully converted into a data type. So now what we have to do is we have to actually perform the call using the URL session class, but first we need to make a URL request struct. So we're going to say let URL request is equal to, this is where we're going to call the function we just wrote, right? So get URL request. The HTTP method, right, of course, will be post because we're posting. And the end of the URL, I'm going to send it to you, Rags.
Hopefully, it's not more than 200 characters.
No, it's pretty
Okay.
short. Yeah. Can you get this?
And again, if you cannot follow during the workshop, this recording will be available. You can try it later on the same link. And most of the code is available, on the GitHub repository, so you can kind of use that.
Yeah.
So don't.
And we could add a new file with this all of this
Yeah, we can
code.
put it on gist like we were discussing, before the workshop. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the end of the URL. You'll notice that this will be added to the main part of the URL, right? So the entire URL will be v2/namespaces, the key space, and the collection user info. So we're going to be posting to the collection user info, okay? So now that we have the URL request with the correct info, now we're going to actually perform the HTTP request using the URL session class. We're going to do URL session.shared.upload, okay? You'll notice that it takes 2 parameters, a URL request and a data. So we're going to pass the variables that we just created and upload data. So it turns out that this is the asynchronous call that throws an error. So since it throws an error, we're going to say try. Since it's asynchronous, we're going to say await. Remember, this call returns data back, right? When we were posting, we got the document ID, right? So that's the data that we're going to retrieve. And we're also going to get a response. So it turns out that in Swift, you can return an ordered pair. So this is how you would do it. You're going to set let data and response is equal to this call. So if you notice that if I add just some random third parameter, there's going to be an error, right? Because it's not expecting a third parameter. It's only expecting to return a data and a URL response. So now that we have the data and the URL response, we're going to ensure that the response code indicates a successful post, right? So we're going to convert the response into a HTTP URL response like this as an HTTP URL response. And we're going to ensure that the response.status code is equal to the correct code. So it turns out that the correct code is 201. So if the code is 201, that's great. Else, there's going to be an error. So I'm just going to add a comment here that a successful posts to Astra using the document API as status code 201. So if we're in here, that means the status code is not 201, which means there's been an error. So we're going to print the response so we know what the error is. And we're going to print could not post to collection user info. And we're going to return. So if the code gets to here, that means that the response code is correct, which means the oh, I forgot to add let's because we're instantiating a new variable. So if the code gets to here, that means that the response code is 201, which means the post is successful. So what we want to do now is we're going to convert the data that we retrieved, which is a JSON, right? It's going to look like this. It's going to have the document ID as a field. So we're going to convert that data into a string so we can print it. So we're going to do if response.mimetype is equal to application/JSON. We're going to let the data string is equal to a string, which will take a data. Okay, this data is the data that was retrieved from the URL session call, and we're going to use the encoding .utf-8, okay? So you'll notice that the response on MIME type should be application JSON because we specified the accept header field to application JSON. So if the code gets to here, that means that the post is successful and we were able to convert the data into a string. So now we can do print got data is the data string, okay? And we're going to print post to collection user info is successful. And we're going to return. I'm going to add a quick comment here. Data string is of the form document ID, and then the actual document ID, right? This is the same JSON that was returned here when we were posting. So just quickly, right, if the code gets to here, that means that the post was successful, but we couldn't convert the data into a string for some reason. So we're just going to say data could not be converted to string. So that is it for this function. So if we call this function and pass a user info struct, it's going to actually post that struct to the user info collection, to your own database. So let's test that. Let's test this function to make sure that it works. So I'm going to test it by going to the content view and I'm going to change the button name to now post user info. So remember, how do we call a backend function? Just like we did here. It's going to be post user info, okay? And it's going to take a user info. So let's say I want to create a user info and I want to post, create a new account, right? So I'm going to create an account called user 21 and password pass. However, I can't call this function right now because it's an asynchronous call. And it throws an error, so I have to say try await. But to be able to call this kind of function from the front end, I have to surround it by a task block. So now that I have this, if I run the app, there's going to be a button, post user info. When I click the button, it's going to call this function, which will create an account, right, by posting this user info into my database. I'm going to do Command R. The build is successful. So that means there's no bugs. And you'll notice that if I perform a GET request here to get a user info, with username, instead of Andy1, I'm going to put user21. For now, the data retrieved is an empty JSON because in the user info collection, if I get that document where the username is user21, for now there's no account. However, if I click on this button, we can see the post is successful, right? So I'm gonna stop the simulator. So we can see the post is successful and we got the document ID returned right here. So if I do the same call right now, the JSON return is no longer empty, which means that the function works, right? The document retrieved has the same document ID that was retrieved here, right? And the password is passed and the username is user21. So once again, we know that the function works, right? We can post a user info from the front end. We could make sure that the document was successfully posted by taking this document ID, going to Swagger UI, and changing the document ID. If I hit execute, we see here that the document is now in the database, right? The username is user21 and the password is pass. So that's it for that function. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Now that we know how to post something, we're going to see how to patch. So it turns out that patch is to update a document. So let's say that this user21 wants to change his password. He's going to have to use patch. So it's the exact same process as post, except we're going to change the HTTP method from post to patch, and we're going to code a different struct, which only encompasses the password, not the username. Yeah. So we're going to actually copy paste the code and make some small adjustments.
So
let's go.
If you want to map this to like a CRUD based method, right? So this is equivalent to the update, right? CRUD is create, read, update, delete. So
yeah. This is update. Yeah. So I'm going to go to the model and add a new struct. Okay. The struct will be called password. Okay. When you're patching, you only want to encode the field that are actually going to change. So since we're not going to change the username, we don't have to actually encode the username field. So we're going to say struct password codable as only one field, password. Okay. I'm going to go to the database helper file and I'm going to create a new function, okay, which will be called change password. Okay, so func change password. To patch a document, we need the document ID, right? We need to know which document we're going to change or update. So we're going to pass the document ID as a parameter, right, which is a string. And we need, of course, the new password. What will the password be changed to? Once again, we're going to call the URL session class. So that's an asynchronous call that throws an error. That's why we need those two words here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste this code. Usually when you can copy paste code, that means you should probably isolate it in a function, but you'll see in a moment why that can't work. So what we're going to do here is we're going to modify some parts of the code. Okay, so instead of encoding the user info, we're going to encode a password struct. Okay, and the password will be the new password. Okay, this is because we don't have to update the username, right? Once again. So we're also going to modify the HTTP method to patch. Okay, and the end of the URL will be slightly different. Okay, it's still in the user info collection, but we have to pass the document ID. So we're going to say doc ID, okay, which is the string here. It turns out that a successful patch has error code 200, okay? So a successful patch has status code 200. So if the code gets to here, that means that we could not patch to the collection user info. And here we would change it to the patch is successful. So these are the only things we have to change.
So I just want to do a time check. We are about half an hour away, and it's awfully quiet in the chat. Not our typical workshop. So, I know that everybody's paying very close attention to Victor, and Victor is going through a lot of things, walking through the code. But if you have any questions, feel free to put it on chat. And again, a lot of this code is going to be available on the GitHub repo.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we're going to test the function change password. So I'm going to change the name of the button to change password, and I'm going to call the change password function. So the doc ID will be the doc ID that was retrieved last time. And the new password we're going to say will be new password. So before I call this function, I just want to prove to you that if I perform the same GET request from the collection user info, where the username is user21, for now, the password is pass, okay? After calling that function, this should be new password. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to do Command R. Okay, so I'm going to click on the button once, and I'm going to click on the square here to stop the simulator. So we can see that the data has been retrieved, and the patch to collection user info is successful, which means that if I perform the same GET request, the password will no longer be pass, it will be new password. And here we can see that the password is indeed new password, and the username has not been changed. So clearly the change password function works, right? It's been changed from pass to new password. We could use Swagger UI again by going to the get a document, putting the correct token, the correct key space, the correct user info, and the correct document ID. If I hit execute, this will no longer be pass, it will be new password. And we can see that indeed the password has been changed. Okay, so from the code, we know how to post, we know how to patch. Let's go back to the presentation and see what the next function will be. Right, we're going to see how to get now. So this is probably the hardest one. So the first steps are exactly the same, okay? How do we get? First, we create an instance of the URL request struct and set the correct HTTP request info. Once again, step one is handled by the get URL request function that we wrote. That was the first function we wrote. Then we're going to make the HTTP request to the server using the URL session class. Right, we've done this before. And then from that call, we're going to get the data and the response back. Remember, that data that will be returned will be in JSON format. Right, we can see here that it starts with a data field. So what we're going to do is we're going to process this string to make it look like this right here. This string now looks kind of like a dictionary or like a map, where the key is a string and the value is a user info. So we're going to use the JSON decoder class, not JSON encoder, but JSON decoder, to decode from a JSON into a dictionary. Swift makes this very easy. It's just going to be a few lines. And we're going to convert that JSON into a dictionary where the key is a string and the value is a user info struct. And once we have it as a dictionary, we can actually manipulate it in code. So let's go to Xcode and write the function. So we're going to start actually by creating the function that will return this string, okay? So it's going to perform the HTTP request and return the string. So this is the function that we're going to write. It's a get request function, okay? So function get request. It's going to take, of course, the end URL as a string. That's the only part that will change. Since we're going to make a call using the URL session class, it's an asynchronous call that throws an error, and we're going to return the string. Remember, the string is of this format, okay? It's a JSON with the data field. So we're going to perform the request to the server. So first we need a URL request struct. The URL request is equal to get URL request. The HTTP method will of course be get, and the end URL will be, well, the end URL that is passed as a parameter, right? And then we're going to get the data and the response back. So you've seen this line before, let data response is equal to try await URL session dot shared dot data. And there's only one parameter, URL request. Right, we don't need a second parameter because there's no data to actually post. So once we have the data retrieved, we're going to first make sure that the response code indicates a successful get. So we're going to say guard let response is equal to response as an HTTP URL response, and we're going to make sure that the response dot status code is equal to 200. Okay, so else if it's not 200, that means there's been an error. So I'm just going to say here a successful get request, okay, using the document API has status code 200. So if the code gets to here, I'm going to print the response. And I'm going to print error occurred during get request. Okay. And I'm going to return an empty string. Usually this is where you would actually throw an error, but just for our purposes, we're going to return an empty string. So if the code gets to here, that means that the get request was successful, right? So I'm going to now convert the data into a string, and then we're going to return that string. Same thing as before, if response dot MIME type is equal to application slash JSON. We're going to create a string from the data that was returned by the URL session call. Using UTF-8 encoding. So if the code gets to here, that means that we can print data string, and we can return the data string, okay? Always a good idea to comment your code. So I'm going to say that data string is of the form data, right? There's a data field, and then there is an actual JSON, which will have the document ID and the actual user info. or orders, right? If we're getting orders. So once again, right, the string that is returned by this call is, it looks like this, okay? Um, and right, we have to say here that if the code gets to here, that means that the GET request is successful, but we could not convert the data into a string. So we're going to say data could not be converted into a string. And I'm going to return an empty string. Okay, so this function for now performs a GET request and returns this string. So now we have to create another function which will call the function we just wrote. It's going to process the string and convert it into a dictionary and then return the dictionary. Okay, so let's create the function. First, we have to create the function process the data string, right? So this is a function that I'm not going to go over because it's just string manipulation. It has nothing to do with actually connecting to the database. So Rags, I think this function is too big for me to just send in the chat. So I could email it to you, but I think we should just create a GitHub repo
Yeah, we can
just
create
for
it just
this.
later. At
Yeah,
this point, it may be too late for people to follow along anyway. So I would suggest you keep
exactly.
going here. We have only about 20 minutes left. Yeah.
Exactly. So this function will take the string that we just, right, that will be returned by the function we wrote, and it's going to process it so that it looks like this at the end. It's going to look like a dictionary where the key is a doc ID and the value is either an order or user info. In our case, it's going to be user info, of course. Okay, so let's write the main function, which will actually return the dictionary. So we're going to write the function get user info, okay, which will take a username as a parameter. Of course, it's an asynchronous and it throws an error. And this will return a dictionary, okay, where the key is a string or a doc ID, and the value is a user info. So we're going to call now both functions that we just wrote, okay? So the data string, we're going to get it by calling the function we wrote first, which is the get request function, okay? And the end of the URL will be this, okay, right here. So we can see the end of the URL has the name slash namespaces, of course, the key space name in the collection user info, where the username is equal to username and the page size is 1, because we want to retrieve a maximum of 1 document, because usernames are unique. So either there's 1, either there's 0 if there's no account. So now that we have the data string, we have to process it, calling the process data string. So we're going to say let's formatted data is equal to process data string, and we're going to pass the data string. So there is a second parameter that is returned, which is page state. So for example, if we want to retrieve more than 20 orders or more than 20 documents, we would use a page state. So I'm going to explain what page state is later on, but for now, we're just going to ignore it. Since we're only getting 1 document, we don't need a page state, right? So now that we have the formatted data, I'm just going to remind you all where we're at, right? We perform the GET request and we process the data string, which means all we have to do now is convert it into a dictionary. So how do we convert it into a dictionary? This is kind of the tricky part, but we'll get through it. So we have to convert it into first something called a JSON data, okay? So let's the formatted data, which is the string that's returned. We're going to convert it into a data, okay, using UTF-8. Once we've converted it into a JSON data, we're going to convert it into a dictionary. So this is kind of a heavy line, so I'm just going to go through it and then explain it afterwards. This is where we're going to use the JSON decoder. Okay, so I'm going to go over this line quickly. What this does, okay, so we have the formatted data, we convert it into a data type, and then the JSON decoder, okay, will take that data, convert it into this kind of dictionary, where the key is a string and the value is a user info. And it's going to use the JSON data, okay? And it's going to put that into this variable called user info dictionary. So I'm going to add some comments to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, user info dictionary is a dictionary of string to user info, or really it's doc ID, right, to user info. So if the user info dictionary dot count is equal to 0, that means that there is no account or username. And if the user info dictionary dot count is equal to 1, there is an account or username. Okay. So once we have the dictionary, we're just going to return the dictionary, right? Because that's what we want to do. So it turns out that this is the call that might not work. This could throw an error. So what we're going to do is we're going to surround it by a do block, okay? And we're going, if we catch an error, we're just going to say print could not convert or decode into a dictionary, okay? This is where we would throw an error, but we're just going to return an empty dictionary, okay? Just to compile the code correctly. So there's one last thing we have to do, right? If this doesn't work, that means that we could not convert the string into a data type. So if for some reason this doesn't work, we're going to say could not convert string to data. And once again, we will return an empty dictionary. Okay, so that is it for this function. Right, we perform a GET request, we process the data string, we convert it into a dictionary, and we return the dictionary. So how do we test this? We're going to test this by creating another function that will call this one, okay? So we're going to write this function, which will call, for example, print the user info dictionary, okay? Function print the user info dictionary. So we need to pass the username, of course, as a parameter. So this is where we're going to call the function get user info, okay, for the username. And what we're going to do is if the dictionary.count is 0, we're going to say no account for the username, and we're going to return. Else, since we are expecting username to be unique, right? So dictionary.count must be equal to 1. We're going to now print the user info. So this means we're going to print the username and password. So how do we access them from the dictionary? So we're going to say let user info is dictionary of dictionary.start index, because there's only one. So it's going to be the start index dot value, and the doc ID. Remember, the dictionary has key that is a string, which is the doc ID, and value user info. So we're going to say let doc ID is equal to dict dot dictionary dot start index dot key. Okay. And we're going to print the username. Okay, user info dot username, and we're going to print the password user info dot password. And we're also just going to print the doc ID, okay? Which is just the doc ID. Okay, so now what we have to do is, well, we don't need this return statement actually, because it's in an if-else block. So what we have to do now is call this function to be able to make sure um, that the get user info function works. So let's go to content view. I'm going to comment out change password, and I'm going to change the button to now print user info. And I'm going to say try await print the user info for the username. What did we use? User 21,
User 21.
right? Okay, so what it's going to do is, right, it's going to perform this get request, and it's going to print the password, new password, username, user 21, and it's going to print this document ID. So I'm going to save and run it. So remember, when we click this button, all that we've written is going to execute in the back end. If I click it, we can see that there is a got data, okay, which means that the get request is successful. And we can see here, the username is user21, the password is new password, and the doc ID as the correct doc ID, right? So that means that we've successfully retrieved data from the database, and we've converted it into a struct again. So remember, when we post it, we convert it from a struct to a JSON using the JSON encoder. And when we're getting data, we convert it from a JSON into a struct using the JSON decoder. So yeah, that is how we get from the database. So now we know how to post, how to patch, how to get. I don't think we have time
Yeah, let's skip
for.
the delete. I was going to suggest that, because it's probably going to be the same, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can. So the thing is, I can include it in the repo, but let's just not go
Yeah,
over it for
yeah.
the workshop. But this is how you would do it. It's pretty simple. So let's just move on. So I'm going to quickly go over how to get all documents. I'm not going to show you the code, but so how do we get all documents? For now, we know how to get some documents, but only a maximum of 20, right? The previous slides explain how to get, for example, 20 documents. That's because the maximum amount of documents we can get in one HTTP request is 20. If we want more than 20 docs in one collection, the JSON return will contain two fields, okay, data and page states. And if we do the same get request, but we add the query parameter page state with a value from the previous get request, we'll get the following 20 docs. And we repeat this process until there's no page state returned in the JSON doc. Um,
And those
so
of you who
this is
might
the,
be wondering, what's this arbitrary 20 number, right? The idea behind
yeah,
that is, you want it to be performant, and people still use 20 line kind of screen, right? Where they're able to get the information, and then if you want the next 20, you page through it, and that's kind of where the page comes
exactly.
in.
So this is the pseudocode. So we perform a GET request. If there's no page state, that means we're done. That means we've retrieved all the documents. If there is a page state, we're going to perform a GET request with the same page state from the previous GET request. We're going to update the page state and keep on performing this GET request, right, in this while loop. So if this is still a bit confusing, I think this analogy will help. Think of a collection, right? Remember, the collection user info has a list of JSON documents. So think of this collection as being a book where each page has a maximum of 20 documents. Page state is like a bookmark that marks the next page. So it lets you know where you are in the book or in the collection so that you can keep on getting the next documents. So that is it. Let's move on to the next slide. So how do we create a simple view just to create an account? Okay. You'll notice that we're going to call both of these functions that we just wrote. So let's go to content view. Okay. And now I'm going to comment these out. Actually, I'm going to comment all of this. Okay, so here now I can see the preview. So what we want, right? We want to create a view to create an account. So we're going to need to create an account, you need a username and password. So we need two text fields. We need the username text field, the password text field, and then below it a button that will create the account. So you'll notice that these have to be vertically stacked, right? There's a reason why I'm using that word. We have to create a VStack, okay? Where we'll have two text fields, okay? And then a button, okay? The first text field will hold the username, and the second text field will hold the password. So we have to create some variables to hold these values. So at state private var username, okay, and at state private var password. So at states informs Swift that whenever this variable is changed, the UI should be refreshed. Okay, that's all that does. So now we're going to create the text field, okay? The text field will have the string enter a username, and the variable that will hold the value will be the username variable, okay, that we just created. Turns out we have to add a $sign because it's a binding variable. So we're going to do the same thing for the second text field. Enter a password, and the text will be now the password, okay? I click on resume, and it doesn't work here. Create accounts. So within these lines, right, this is where we'll actually create the account. If I hit resume, right, this should work. We're going to see a simple preview. See the simple preview. There's a text field where you can enter username and where you can enter a password, and below it you have create account. So the order here matters, right? If this text field was above, it would be higher on the vertical stack. So we would see it higher on the preview. So how do we create an account? Well, first we have to make sure that there's not an account that's already been created, okay? Let's first ensure, though, that the username is not empty and that the password is not empty, okay? So if they are empty, we're going to print username and password cannot be empty, okay? And we will return. So if the code gets to here, the username and password are not empty. So now we're going to get the user info, okay? So let dictionary is equal to try await get user info, okay? For the username, whatever the username as whatever the username value is. Of course, right, since this is an asynchronous call that throws an error, we have to surround it by a task block in the front end. So we get the user info, okay? And now we want to ensure that there's not an account that already exists. So if dictionary.count is equal to 1, we're going to print account already exists for username, okay? Cannot create accounts. And we will return. So if the code gets to here, that means that the dictionary.count is 0, which means there's no account. So what we will do, what we will do is actually post the account or post the user info to create an account. So we're going to say try await post user info, and we're going to create a user info struct with the correct values, right? The username is the username variable and the password is the password variable. Okay, so I'm quickly going to go over this button once again, right? If the username or password are empty, we return. Then we get the user info. If the dictionary.count is 1, that means there's already an account, so we can't create it. So if the dictionary.count is 0, then we post the user info to create the accounts, okay? And just to make it look better, here we're going to add some padding. Dot all, let's add 10. And same thing here. Okay. And I'm going to add some padding for the button as well. Okay, so now I'm going to do Command B to make sure the build is successful. So the build is succeeded, which means there's no bug. So I'm going to do Command R.
So Victor, we're already at 1. So
Yeah, this is the last
perfect,
part,
yeah.
and then we'll be done.
Just wanted to kind of give you a time
So,
check. I love the fact that you're going through all the details, which we seldom do, but this is great. Keep going.
So if I hit create account, right, username and password can't be empty. So let's say I say user 1 and password. If I hit create account, we see that the post is successful. And if I click create account again, it's going to say account already exists, cannot create account. So this is how you create a simple view to create an account by using the functions that we wrote, get user info and post user info. So that's it. I'm going to go back to the presentation.
And the account and password information is stored in Astra, correct? Just to be clear, because it's
Yes,
using the same
absolutely.
function. Yeah.
Exactly. Do we have time for a quick demo of the app?
Yeah, I think we do. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
people would like to
So
see
this is
the
a quick demo of the
finished
app.
product. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is the app which calls the exact same functions that we just went over. Okay. So I'm going to quit Xcode and open the correct project. So obviously there's a bit more files here. But yeah, it's the same principles. See, we can see that there's a get user info function right here. It's the same principles. Okay, so I'm going to run it on the simulator. And here you're going to see an example of how page state is used. Okay, so here's a quick demo of the app. You can see the simulator, right, Rags?
Yes.
Okay. So let's wait for the app to load.
That's a cool logo too. I like it.
Yeah, it's the launch screen. Yeah, makes it look
Yes.
professional.
I mean, we are all engineers, right? We don't care about these kind of things, but Xcode takes care of it.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so now it's been loaded. So I'm gonna give you a quick tour. Let's start by, for example, creating an account. Let's use user 21 because I don't think there's an account for this. So by the way, quickly, this app is connected to my own database, which is a different database than the one I was using for this workshop. So there's going to be a lot of fake accounts, okay? So if I want to create an account here with, let's say, password, right? I can't sign in. Oh, it says there's already an account. So let's just create user 22. There is no account with username user 22, so I have to create an account, right? We can see here that it's posting using the post user info. So once the account has been created, I can sign in, and I can manually post an order. I can take a picture of the receipt, and I can see all past orders. So if I see all past orders, right, for now, of course,
There is
there's
zero.
0
Yeah.
orders because it's a new account. So let's say I want to post a new order. Let's say that user 22 does some groceries with VMake, okay? And they share one product that has price 10, okay? So the price is 10 and there's 2 users, okay? So if I post the order, we can see that VMake owes 5 to user 22, right? Because they're sharing it, and user 22 paid for it. So if I go to see past orders, we can see that now the order has been posted, okay? If I go to compute all past orders, we can see that VMake owes 5 to user 22. So that's one of the functionalities. So what if now I want to take a picture of the receipts? I can choose a photo from the library. Right, this is just some arbitrary receipts. I get the prices from the photo. This is where an API call to an ML API call is performed. So let's say that, oh, the ML didn't work perfectly. I want to remove the price 20. I want to remove the price 6.66. Now I want to remove the price 1.99. So I remove them. Then I hit next. This is where I have to input the list of users for each price. So let's say that for the first price, 199, only user 22 used it. For the second price, user 22 and VMake used it. VMake has some other accounts. And for the last price, we'll just say that only VMake used it, okay? So now that we have all the users for each price, I can post the order. It's going to tell me that VMake owes a certain amount to user 22, and it's going to show me the order summary. So if I go to home and see past orders, we can see that now that order has been successfully posted.
There are 2 orders.
And if I hit view all past orders, it's going to now tell me how much VMake owes to user 22. Okay.
I think you
So
kind of
that is,
glossed over the ML part of it, right? Basically, what it's doing is we are
yeah,
using a ML toolkit to scan the receipt and kind of extract that information out of that, and all of that again is on the
yeah,
GitHub repository if you want to try it out.
exactly. Yeah, there's information on the README if you want to replicate this project and use the ML. So let's say we want to just delete the accounts. If I create the account again and sign in, there's no past
Right.
orders, okay? Because when we delete an account, we want to delete all the orders as well. And just quickly, I'm going to show you how page state is used. So one of the fake accounts, okay, is called Gabe1. It has, I think, 197 orders. So if I click see past orders, we're going to see all the page dates. Each page state signifies that 20 documents were retrieved, okay? So if I click see past orders, we see all these page dates that were printed. We can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right, 9 times 20 is almost 197 or a bit over, which is perfect. And we can see that now all these orders have been printed, and yeah, it's in chronological order. And that's how much each person owes to Gabe1. Okay, so this is how page state is used. So yeah, that's basically every feature. I could change the password here. For example, here I change it to pass. And now if I sign in, it's going to say incorrect password, and I have to change it to pass. There you go. And this function, right, is the change password function that we just wrote. So that is it for the demo. Let's go back here. So I showed you how to, right, call these functions, how to delete an account, how to sign in, how to create an account and change password, how to see all past orders. These are all functions that we quickly glossed over. So the next part is quickly, right, the takeaways. What have we learned today? These are the main ones, okay? The main one, the first one, is that many big companies such as Netflix, Apple, Instagram etc. Right? There's many others used Cassandra because of its reliability, efficiency, and ease of use. The second takeaway is that performing HTTP requests in an iOS app to connect to the Astra database is swift and painless. And the
I
yep,
like the Swift usage there.
yep,
So
and the
it's the same with Java as well, although it doesn't really float that well.
yeah, um, yeah. So that's it for the pun. And the third one is that using the document API to connect to the Astra database is pretty easy, right? We went over it in less than 2 hours. And it allows a lot of the management of the database to be abstracted from the developer, so we can just focus on working on the app itself, right? If you notice that we don't even have to know how the database works at all in order to use the document API. So that's pretty cool. So that is it for my part. I'm going to hand it over to Rags if you want to go over the swag and
Absolutely.
the
Yeah, let's do
questions.
that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to bring the music on because, um, I know it's been a long session. So let me know if you can hear the music. Hopefully you do. And I'm going to make sure that Minty is on as well. So, all right. So for those of you who haven't, don't have Menti in front of you, I'll have to make a kind of an executive decision here. If less than 3 people join the Menti, I may have to give it to only 1 or 2. But if there are more than 3 people, we'll give it out to 3. Okay, it depends. Let me see how many people are joining. Okay, so I'm gonna wait for a little bit. I know we have a few. I know people from DataStax are not eligible to win, so so let's see how it goes. All right, we have a few. I'll give you some more time. The Menti code, if you can't see it, just type bang Menti, that is exclamation Menti, in the chat, and you should see this code 26247895. That is again 26247895. Okay. Alrighty. Still fun even if you have not many people playing. It's still fun anyway. So let's try this out. All right. Okay. Quiz time. Ready? All right. No results. All right. I think I might have made a mistake here, but maybe not. Okay. So we have about 6 or 8 people in here. So let's see how it goes. All right. Question number 1. Answer fast, but more importantly, answer correctly. What is the purpose of the Astra DB token? Look at your phone. Don't look at the chat. Don't put anything in chat. Put it in Menti, please. We have 10 more seconds. Let's see if we can have a few more people responding. 5 seconds. All right. We got 4 people getting the right answer. Let's see the leaderboard. All right. All right. Barefoot Contessa. Hopefully that's not any of our DataStax folks. Um, Barefoot Contessa is fastest. But let's see. Anybody has a good chance to win here. Okay. Abdul Rahman, I know you got it wrong, but no big deal. Still open. Okay. Question 205. Answer fast, but more importantly, correctly. What do you need to delete a document using the document API? Do you need patience? Do you need query string? Do you need the page state? Or do you need the doc ID? Which of the 4? 6 seconds. 5. Time's up. All right, let's see who. Oh, we got 4 people. Doc ID. Let's see how it goes. Oh, Barefoot Contessa is still in the lead, and Shiv is moving up. Let's see what happens next. We still have, three more questions to go. Okay. So question 3 of 5. Answer fast, but more importantly, correctly. Which object holds the information about the HTTP request? Is it the URL request struct? Is it the URL session class? Is it the JSON encoder class? Or the HTTP request class? Or none of them, really? Ooh, people are taking time. Only 3 people answered this. And only 1 person got this right. All right, this is going to be fun. I think you made it very hard for them. but we'll see.
Yeah.
Who is the winner? Victor got it right, I think. That's because it's you, right?
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah.
So Barefoot Contessa is still leading. We still have time. We have 2 more questions to go. Question 4. What HTTP method do you use to update a doc in a collection? What HTTP method? Is it update? Is it patch? Is it change? Or is it post? Post, change, patch, or update. 10 seconds to go. Anybody could win. Still anybody's game. Keep playing. All right. 2 people got update. And 1 person got the correct method, which is the patch. And we'll see who that is. All right. Barefoot Contessa got it right. Victor, I assume you didn't answer the question, right? All right. Moving on.
Yeah.
Last question for all the marbles. To retrieve more than 20 docs from a collection, what additional query parameter has to be passed? Is it page size? Is it page state? Is it page number? Or is it page status? Two, 1, 0. Time's up. All right. Nobody got page state. But let's see how the leaderboard looks. Barefoot Contessa is the winner. Congratulations. We will tell you how to get the information. But for those of you who are on the top 3, that is Victor, you're not included. Abdul Rahman and maybe Tommy, you can send it too. But just mention that you're on 5. Okay, and then whoever is in the middle, 1539 points. Just make a screenshot of this and have it ready. I'll leave it here for a little bit so that you can take a screenshot. Okay? So for those of you who are participating, take a screenshot. Okay? Assuming you're good to go, let's finish up the presentation and wrap this and call this done. All right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what you're going to do. Congrats to first, second, and third place. To claim your prize, just fill in the form at datastax.io/workshop swag. Okay, and this is available on the in the PDF, in the slides. If you can't, note down the URL, don't be worried. Okay, you can still get it later. All right. All right. Next slide, please. You can join our Discord community where you have more detailed discussions, more permanent discussions. Or you can go to Stack Overflow, which is in the next slide. We encourage you to use any of the resources that you find works for you. But don't forget to follow the Cassandra tag. We have a lot of people answering on Discord, on Stack Overflow, and DBA Stack Exchange as well. Okay. Next slide. If those of you who are in San Francisco, feel free, if you're not in San Francisco also, feel free to suggest to people in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. We have an Astra Day coming up on August 24th, And I know that Patrick McFadden, who is actually on the chat, is one of the speakers there as well. So feel free to sign up for this. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we should
We've done this
skip
before.
that out. And with that, I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And do come for our workshops, which typically happen every Wednesday. Victor, you want to say anything before we say adios?
Yeah, thanks everyone for following and for
Bye-bye.
participating.
And as always, don't forget to click that subscribe button and ring that bell to get notifications for all of our future upcoming.
Imagine a being gifted with powers from the goddess of Cassandra, who grew those powers until she could multiply at will, move with limitless speed, and unmask hidden knowledge. With those powers, she was able to fully understand the connectedness of the world. What she saw was a world in need of understanding. From that day forward, she sought to bestow her powers on all who came into contact with her, empowering them to achieve wondrous feats.